In the vast churning emptiness of the North Atlantic, the USS Gerald R. Ford wasn't merely a ship. It was a declaration, 100,000 tons of American will, forged into a floating fortress of diplomacy and destruction. At over $13 billion, it was the most expensive, most powerful, and most technologically advanced weapon ever created. The undisputed queen of a steel chessboard that spanned the globe. On its flight deck, F-35 Sea Lightning II jets, the apex predators of the sky, sat with folded wings, their sleek fuselages humming with latent power. Below decks, a crew of nearly 5,000 moved, with the practiced rhythm of absolute confidence. They were the tip of the spear, the guardians of an empire, and in their minds, they were untouchable. This belief wasn't arrogance, it was doctrine, backed by decades of unrivaled supremacy. They owned the seas. Then, in the space of a heartbeat, a single, terrifying whisper from the deep proved them wrong. The moment the world changed began not on the Admiral's starlit bridge, but in the cold, sterile dark of the Combat Information Center. A young sonar technician, no older than 20, stared at his screen, his face a mask of disbelief. He saw a ghost, a flicker, something that, according to every manual and every war game, simply could not be there. He ran the diagnostic again. The ghost didn't vanish. It sharpened, and it had company. A frantic call to his superior, a rushed confirmation, and a wave of ice-cold dread washed through the ship's metallic veins, climbing the chain of command until it crashed onto the Admiral's bridge. The unthinkable had happened. They were surrounded. 3 hostile contacts inside the wire. They had slipped through a multi-billion-dollar net of sensors, satellites, patrol aircraft, and escort destroyers designed to detect a threat hundreds of miles away. These weren't fishing trawlers. The acoustic signature analysis, cross-referenced in a nanosecond against a global threat library, was a death sentence. Project 885M. The Yasin M-class nuclear submarine, Russia's quietest, most lethal hunter-killer, an instrument built with a singular, chilling purpose, to kill American aircraft carriers. 3 of them had formed a perfect, coordinated triangle, a launch basket with the $13 billion heart of American naval power trapped in the center. The message was as clear and as brutal as a cocked hammer against a temple. Checkmate. How could the undisputed master of the seas, a fortress defended by the most advanced technology on Earth, be so utterly and completely blindsided? The answer lies in the dark art of undersea warfare, a game of physics and psychology played in a 3-dimensional battle space where the environment itself is a weapon. The American Carrier Strike Group is a symphony of defense. A friendly Virginia-class submarine hunts silently, miles ahead. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the group's loyal knights, form a protective ring, their powerful sonars actively pinging the depths. Overhead, P-8 Poseidon aircraft drop curtains of sonobuoys listening. MH-60R Seahawk helicopters dip their own sensors into the waves, sniffing for magnetic anomalies. It's a layered shield, a web of overlapping fields of fire and detection. Yet, the Russian phantoms had passed through it as if it wasn't there. They did it by becoming one with the ocean. Submarine commanders are not just sailors. They are oceanographers of war. They understand that the sea is not a uniform medium. It is a tapestry of shifting currents, pressures, and temperatures. They exploited the thermocline, a liquid curtain where temperature changes abruptly, bending and reflecting sound waves like a distorted mirror, creating vast shadow zones where a submarine can vanish. They would have moved at impossibly slow speeds, their nuclear reactors silenced, their machinery mounted on sound-dampening rafts, making them quieter than the ocean's own background hum. They would have used the noise of the carrier group itself, the thrum of its engines, the cacophony of its own sonar pings, as a form of acoustic camouflage to mask their final approach. This wasn't just a military maneuver, it was a masterpiece of stealth, patience, and predatory instinct, a coordinated underwater ballet of death executed with terrifying perfection, an act of such audacious brinkmanship doesn't arise from nothing. It is a move in a much larger, high-stakes game. For months, the geopolitical chessboard had been heating up. In the melting Arctic, a new gold rush was on. Russia, viewing the northern sea route as its ancestral birthright, watched with growing fury as the United States led freedom of navigation operations, challenging Moscow's control over the lucrative new shipping lanes. The Kremlin saw this not as a defense of international law, but as an attack on its economic lifeline coastline and a violation of its sovereign sphere. This was a red line, and when a great power believes its core interests are threatened, it doesn't send a diplomatic note, it sends a message. The encirclement of the USS Gerald R. Ford was that message, written in the cold language of water pressure and warhead capability. It was a masterstroke of asymmetric strategy. Russia knows it cannot win a conventional dollar-for-dollar arms race with the United States, so it doesn't try. Instead, it invests in areas where it can achieve parity or even superiority to create strategic leverage. The Yasin M submarine is the embodiment of this philosophy. By holding America's most valuable asset at risk, Moscow was shattering Washington's most cherished illusion, invincibility. It was a brutal reminder that even a titan can be humbled. The silent threat from the deep was designed to coerce, to force a de-escalation on Russia's terms. The implicit demand was clear: back away from our Arctic waters, or we will demonstrate in the most catastrophic way imaginable that your queen just another piece on the board. Aboard the Ford, the controlled calm of routine operations had evaporated, replaced by the electric hum of general quarters. This was the sleeping giant roaring to life. On the flight deck, pilots scrambled to their FA-18s, their faces grim. These were no longer drills. The destroyers in the strike group, the Thomas Hudner and the Forrest Sherman, were already maneuvering, their crews racing to bring their anti-submarine rockets and torpedoes online. The Seahawks were in the air, hunting desperately for the ghosts that had outmaneuvered them. The full, awesome power of the carrier strike group was unleashed, a symphony of defense turning into a chorus of potential offense. But no one fired. Every sailor, from the admiral on the bridge to the mechanic in the engine room, understood the terrifying calculus of the moment. The first to pull the trigger would not win a naval battle. They would start World War III. The true battle was no longer in the Atlantic. It was being fought in hushed, frantic conversations in Washington, D.C. and Moscow. The hotline, that relic of a previous Cold War, was once again the most important telephone on the planet. In the White House Situation Room, the president and his national security advisors were confronted with an impossible choice. To back down would be to capitulate to nuclear blackmail, a signal of weakness that would embolden adversaries and terrify allies across the globe. To attack would be to initiate a sequence of events that could lead to an exchange of intercontinental ballistic missiles. The world was hanging on the precipice, balanced on the razor's edge of a single decision. The path out was a narrow, treacherous one, a quiet, face-saving de-escalation, a back-channel deal where the U.S. might agree to postpone its Arctic operations in exchange for the immediate, verifiable withdrawal of the Russian submarines. No victory parades, no triumphant press conferences, just a silent, mutual step back from the abyss. Regardless of how the standoff ended, the event itself would serve as a cataclysmic shock to the system, a strategic Sputnik moment for the 21st century. The United States Navy would be forced into a period of painful, soul-searching introspection. The long-held belief in technological overmatch would be shattered. Doctrines would be rewritten. An avalanche of funding would be redirected towards a new generation of undersea warfare technology. More advanced sensors, autonomous hunter-killer drones, and even quieter American submarines. The focus of the entire military-industrial complex would pivot from the counterinsurgency wars of the last 2 decades to the grim reality of high-end, great power competition. For America's allies, who had built their entire defense posture on the bedrock of U.S. naval supremacy, the incident would be a terrifying glimpse into a future where the American security guarantee was no longer absolute. The ripples would spread through NATO, through Asia, and beyond, forcing nations to question their allegiances and reassess their own vulnerabilities. The silent war beneath the waves, a contest of skill and nerve that had never truly ended, would enter its most dangerous chapter yet. This encounter in the North Atlantic was about more than just 3 submarines and an aircraft carrier. It was a parable about the nature of power itself, that it is never permanent, that it breeds complacency, and that the greatest strength can often mask the most profound weakness. It was a chilling reminder that in the great game between nations, the most devastating move is the one you never see coming. Aboard the Ford, the admiral stood over the central plotting table, a statue carved from decades of command presence. Yet, beneath the veneer of calm, a storm of impossible calculations raged. Every instinct, honed over a lifetime of naval service, screamed for action. Launch the helos, prosecute the contacts, defend the ship, but his intellect, cold and pragmatic, held him in check. The tactical display was a gallery of useless power. The FA-18s on deck were the finest strikers ever built, but their targets were phantoms hiding beneath 1,000 feet of water. The destroyer's anti-submarine rockets had a range of miles, but deploying one would be an irreversible declaration of war. The Russian commanders knew this. They weren't just hiding, they were gloating in their silence. Each of their Yaizen M submarines was a viper's nest, capable of unleashing a salvo of Kaliber land attack cruise missiles, or Onyx anti-ship missiles, weapons designed to cripple a carrier in a single, devastating blow. The admiral realized with chilling clarity that his role had fundamentally changed. He was no longer a warrior commanding a fleet. He was a warden, tasked with keeping the dogs of war, both his and theirs, caged. The fate of the world now rested not on the sharpness of his sword, but on the strength of his leash. This was no longer a naval engagement. It was a hostage crisis on a global scale, and his $13 billion ship was the hostage. The next move wouldn't be his. It would come from a secure phone line half a world away, spoken by a voice that had to weigh the lives of his 5,000 sailors against the potential annihilation of millions. The waiting was its own form of warfare.